The snow fell heavy that night, swallowing the small town in silence, blanketing the world in a white so thick it seemed to erase everything except the glow of a few lonely streetlights. Roads were buried, cars abandoned, and winds howled through empty streets like restless ghosts. But at the very edge of town, tucked behind a crooked picket fence, stood a little wooden house with smoke curling from its chimney. Inside, a kind old lady named Margaret sat alone by her fire, knitting quietly, her gray hair pinned back, her wrinkled hands steady despite the storm's rage. She had lived many winters in that house, but this one felt especially lonely. With her husband gone for years and her children scattered in faraway cities, the nights often felt longer than the days. That evening, as the blizzard roared louder, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer that everyone out there in the cold might find warmth and shelter. She had no idea how quickly that prayer was about to be answered, or how her life would change forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of compassion, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, comment below what kindness means to you, and don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Corner so we can keep bringing you stories that warm the heart. The knock came suddenly, rattling the old door so hard Margaret nearly dropped her knitting. She hesitated, her heart racing. At her age, unannounced visitors in the middle of the night, during a storm like this, were almost unheard of. She shuffled to the door, clutching her shawl tightly, and when she opened it, the sight before her made her gasp. Standing there in the whirling snow were 15 men, broad-shouldered and leather-clad, their jackets marked with patches that carried a name feared by many, Hell's Angels. Their beards were thick with ice, their faces red from the bitter cold, and their boots sunk deep in the snow. Behind them, motorcycles leaned against one another, nearly buried in the drift, their chrome now frosted white. For a moment, Margaret felt her knees tremble. These were men the world whispered about, tough bikers, troublemakers, men most would cross the street to avoid. But then she saw it. Beneath their hardened exteriors, beneath the tattoos and the frostbitten scowls, they were shivering. Their lips were blue, their hands stiff, their eyes tired. Whatever else they were, tonight they were human beings caught in a storm that could easily take their lives. Without another thought, Margaret stepped aside and said simply, "Come in before you freeze." The bikers glanced at each other, surprised. Most people slammed doors in their faces. Yet here was a frail woman, no taller than their shoulders, opening her warm home to them without hesitation. They filed in one by one, stomping snow from their boots, their presence filling the tiny house until it seemed to groan beneath the weight of leather and steel. Margaret's living room, once quiet and lonely, now pulsed with the heat of 15 bodies thawing beside her fireplace. Margaret didn't waste time. She hurried to the kitchen, pulling out whatever food she could find, bread, canned soup, leftover stew from her dinner. It wasn't much, but she served it with a smile, bustling around her kitchen as though she had expected this company all along. The bikers sat awkwardly, their massive frames squeezed onto her floral couches and wooden chairs, unsure how to act. They weren't used to kindness like this. They weren't used to being seen as men in need, rather than men to be feared. As the hours passed, the storm grew worse, pounding against the windows like a beast desperate to break in. The bikers stayed, telling Margaret bits of their story. They had been traveling from state to state when the storm caught them off guard, and with the highways closed and motels full, they had nowhere to turn. Their bikes had nearly frozen solid outside, and without shelter, they wouldn't have lasted till morning. Margaret listened quietly, her eyes kind and her hands steady as she poured more coffee and laid out blankets she had stored away. One by one, the tough bikers dozed off, wrapped in quilts that smelled faintly of lavender and age, their loud snores echoing in the little house. Margaret sat awake for a long time, watching them sleep, a strange warmth filling her heart. She had never had sons, but tonight, in some strange way, she felt as though she had been given 15 of them. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside glistened, covered in fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds in the pale morning sun. The bikers rose slowly, stretching, rubbing their eyes, and thanking Margaret in their gruff voices. They ate a simple breakfast she had prepared, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, and when they finally stepped outside, they found their bikes half buried but still intact. Before leaving, their leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, turned to Margaret and said, "Ma'am, we won't forget this. Ever." She simply smiled, patting his arm, and wished them safe travels. Then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the 15 bikers rode away, the roar of their engines fading into the distance, leaving Margaret alone once more in her quiet house. She thought that would be the end of it. Just a strange, beautiful memory of one snowy night when her house became a haven for those the world called dangerous. But Margaret had no idea that kindness never fades, it echoes, multiplies, and comes back when you least expect it. The very next morning, just as Margaret was feeding the birds in her snowy yard, she heard a sound that made her stop in her tracks. It was faint at first, like distant thunder rolling across the hills. Then it grew louder. The ground seemed to tremble. Margaret clutched her shawl and stepped closer to the fence, her heart racing. Down the long road leading to her house, she saw them, bikes. Not 10. Not 20. But one after another, stretching as far as the eye could see. 100 motorcycles, their engines roaring, their riders wearing the same leather jackets with the same insignia. They pulled up slowly, lining both sides of the street until Margaret's little house was surrounded, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and snow. Neighbors peeked nervously from their windows, unsure of what was happening, but Margaret just stood there, speechless, tears welling in her eyes. From the front of the line, the tall leader dismounted his bike, walking toward her with something in his hand. He smiled, not the kind of smile that hides mischief, but one that carried respect and gratitude. He handed her a bouquet of fresh flowers, though in the dead of winter, it must have been nearly impossible to find them. "We told the brothers what you did for us," he said. "Word spread. You gave us shelter when no one else would. We don't forget things like that." And then Margaret saw it. From the backs of their bikes, they unloaded bags of groceries, stacks of firewood, and boxes filled with warm clothes, blankets, and supplies. Some even carried tools to repair her fence, to shovel her driveway, to fix the squeaky hinge on her porch door. For hours they worked, filling her little house and yard with the hum of life. Her home, once so quiet, now rang with laughter, the clink of tools, and the rumble of motorcycles. She hadn't felt this alive in years. That day, Margaret realized something powerful: kindness has a ripple effect. What she had given freely, without expectation, had returned 100-fold. In a world that often seemed cold and divided, she had discovered that even the hardest hearts could be softened by compassion. The Hell's Angels, men often branded as dangerous, showed a side few ever got to see, a side that remembered gratitude, loyalty, and honor. As the sun began to set, the bikers gathered in front of her yard, engines revving in unison, a thunderous salute to the woman who had opened her door when the storm threatened their lives. Margaret stood on her porch, her eyes shining with tears, waving as they rode off one by one, the roar echoing through the snowy valley until silence returned once more. But her house would never feel empty again. She knew that somewhere out there, she had family now, family on two wheels, bound not by blood but by kindness. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion, please like this video, share it with others who need hope, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so we can continue spreading stories that prove kindness can change the world. And before we close, I'd love to hear from you. Would you have opened the door that night? Comment below and let's talk about the courage it takes to choose kindness, even when the world tells us to be afraid. Margaret's story is not just about one snowy night. It is about the truth that kindness is never wasted. It plants seeds that bloom in unexpected ways. Sometimes, all it takes is a warm fire, a simple meal, and a door left open in the storm to change not just 15 lives, but 100, or maybe more. And in the quiet of her little house, as she sat by the fire that night, Margaret smiled, knowing she was never truly alone again.
It was a test, cruel, calculated, and cold. In the silence of a marble-floored mansion, beneath a glittering chandelier and the soft ticking of an antique clock, a safe stood wide open in the master's study. Inside, bundles of cash lay stacked like green bricks of temptation, glinting beside ropes of gold and diamonds. He knew she would pass through here. He knew her schedule down to the minute. The man, a millionaire twice over, stood hidden just beyond the hallway arch, eyes narrowed not with anger but with quiet anticipation. And yet, as he watched his housemaid enter the room and pause before the open safe, he never imagined that what would unfold in the next few minutes would utterly unravel him, breaking open a heart he didn't know he still had. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet power of kindness, and in the strength of character that can change lives, then pause right now. Like this video, subscribe to Kindness Corner, and share this story. Let the world hear that integrity still exists in places where no one's watching. The housemaid's name was Camilla, 32, slender, reserved, with deep brown eyes that held the weight of stories she never told. She had been working in the Ashworth estate for just over 7 months. A widow with 2 young daughters and a mother battling cancer, Camilla was the kind of woman who moved silently through pain. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise, tying her dark hair back into a bun, slipping into her simple uniform, and beginning her tasks without complaint or hesitation. To most, she was invisible, a shadow behind silver trays and polished marble. But to Alexander Ashworth, the reclusive millionaire who had inherited wealth but never earned peace, Camilla was a mystery that had begun to haunt him. Alexander had spent most of his life building and protecting his empire. People had stolen from him, betrayed him, used him. His ex-wife took a fortune in the divorce. Former employees siphoned funds. Friends turned opportunists. And so, he built walls, steel ones around his vault and emotional ones around his heart. When Camilla arrived, there was something different about her. She didn't flatter. She didn't ask questions. She never lingered in rooms longer than she had to. And she was, by every record and background check, painfully clean. It bothered Alexander, the way her honesty felt almost threatening, too pure to trust. That's when he devised the test. One Wednesday morning, just before she was scheduled to dust the study, Alexander arranged the safe to be left wide open. He had instructed his security team to disable the hallway cameras temporarily. No one would know this moment happened, except him. He wanted to see what Camilla would do when faced with unimaginable temptation. Would she falter? Would she take? Or was she truly as unshakable as she appeared? Camilla entered the room exactly at 8:42 a.m. She didn't notice the safe at first, not until the sunlight hit the steel door and bounced a glare across the polished floor. She stopped mid-step, her duster frozen in her gloved hand. Her eyes went to the safe, then quickly to the hallway. No one. Silence. Her breath caught in her throat. And for a long moment, she stood still, staring at the open vault as if unsure whether to believe what she was seeing. Alexander's heart pounded. He watched as she approached, slowly, hesitantly. Her fingers hovered just over the stacks of money, then touched nothing. Instead, she reached for the cleaning rag tucked into her apron, and softly began wiping the safe's edge, careful not to smudge or shift a single bundle inside. She didn't count the money. She didn't glance around greedily. She simply wiped the dust off the steel with the same precision she used on every other surface in the mansion. And then something unexpected happened. Camilla reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded photo, creased and old. She glanced at the hallway once more, as if needing to be sure she was alone, and placed the photo on the shelf next to the cash. It was a picture of 2 little girls, maybe 7 and 5, grinning in front of a hospital bed where an older woman lay smiling weakly. Camilla whispered something so softly that even the hidden Alexander couldn't hear. Then, gently, she picked up the photo again, kissed it, and placed it back into her pocket. She closed the safe door. Alexander stepped back into the shadows, stunned. He wasn't sure what he had expected, a quick hand, a stolen bill, maybe even a moment of hesitation. But what he saw was reverence, pain, and love wrapped in restraint. He turned and walked away before she could see the tears forming in his eyes. That evening, Alexander couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. The photo. The quiet kiss. The safe untouched. The weight of it all settled on his chest like a truth he hadn't prepared to confront. It was no longer about the test. It was about her. About the kind of character he had spent his life believing didn't exist. He realized he had judged everyone through the lens of his past wounds, and in doing so, nearly lost sight of the rare goodness standing quietly under his own roof. The next morning, Camilla arrived to find a letter on the kitchen counter, addressed to her in Alexander's neat, heavy handwriting. Inside was a simple note: integrity is priceless. But so is peace. You've given me both. Your daughters and your mother deserve a life without fear. Please accept the enclosed without guilt. It's not a reward. It's a thank you. Attached was a check, blank, signed, and ready. Camila dropped into the nearest chair, stunned. Tears streamed silently down her face. Her hands trembled as she folded the letter to her chest. In that moment, she felt the weight she had carried for years lift just slightly. Her mother's treatment. Her daughter's school fees. The threat of eviction. It could all vanish. And not because she begged or stole, but because she had chosen to do the right thing when no one was looking. That weekend, Alexander visited her home for the first time. Not as an employer, but as a friend. He sat at the small wooden table, played with her daughters, and brought a folder filled with documents to help her purchase a new house in a safer neighborhood. He offered her a new position, head of domestic operations, full benefits, with a flexible schedule that allowed her to care for her family. But more than that, he offered something rare from a man like him, trust. Sometimes, the truest tests aren't passed with applause, but with quiet, unseen choices. Sometimes, the richest people aren't those with the fullest safes, but those who live in truth, even when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. We tell true, emotional stories that reveal the quiet power of humanity. Drop a comment below if you believe that even one act of integrity can change everything. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you do if no one was watching?
The night had been long, but for Mara Lewis, it was finally supposed to end. The soft hum of the coolers echoed through the quiet convenience store, and the smell of coffee grounds lingered in the air. Outside, the world looked calm beneath the pale light of the setting sun. She was wiping down the counter, exhausted but content, ready to turn off the lights and lock up. But fate had other plans, the kind that can twist an ordinary night into something unforgettable. Because just as Mara reached for the key to close the register, the doorbell chimed, and 3 men walked in. Before she could greet them, she felt something cold, not from the air conditioning, but from their eyes. The tall one in front smirked, his boots thudding against the tiled floor. "We're not here to buy," he said with a grin that made her stomach twist. His 2 friends followed close behind, laughing under their breath, their shadows long across the floor. Mara's heart began to race. She glanced toward the clock, 10 minutes past closing. She was alone, or at least, she thought she was. If you believe kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right can still change the world, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. It helps stories like this reach more hearts. Mara tried to keep calm, her voice trembling as she said they were closed, but the men only stepped closer. The one with the leather jacket, his name tag read, Kyle, laughed. "Closed," he echoed mockingly. "We're just getting started." One of them leaned on the counter, pretending to study the candy bars, while the third, wearing a red flannel, moved closer toward the side aisle, blocking her exit. The air felt heavy, suffocating. She thought of her mother, who was home waiting, and how she always said, "You never know who walks into your life, some to hurt you, some to save you." Her trembling hands clutched the counter as Kyle leaned closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Nervous," he taunted. When she didn't answer, he grabbed the front of her red shirt, yanking her forward. The fabric tore near the collar with a sharp sound that broke her inside more than the cloth ever could. She gasped, stumbling back, trying to pull free, but his grip was tight. The other 2 burst into laughter, loud, mocking, cruel. "Guess we found some entertainment tonight," one sneered. Tears filled her eyes, but she fought them back. She couldn't give them that satisfaction. She tried to think, to reach for something, anything, but fear froze her in place. Then, as if the universe had heard her silent cry, a sound came from the back of the store. A soft thud. A step. And then another. The gang turned their heads, confused. Mara followed their gaze, her breath catching when she saw 3 shadows emerging slowly from between the aisles. They moved with calm precision, heavy boots echoing against the clean tiles. The men who had been laughing just seconds ago fell silent. The leader of the group stepped forward into the light, a tall, rugged man in his late 40s, with a thick salt and pepper beard and tattoos crawling down his arms. His black leather vest bore the unmistakable emblem, Hell's Angels. The patch on his chest read, RL.CHLLS. Behind him walked two others, one bald with a long dark beard, the other younger with shoulder-length hair and sunglasses perched on his head. They looked like they had seen enough of the world to recognize trouble when it showed up. Mara stood frozen behind the counter, heart pounding, as the bikers stopped a few steps away. The air between them and the gang was thick with silence. The leader's eyes, cold yet calm, locked on Kyle's hand still gripping her torn shirt. His voice came out low, steady, dangerous. You might want to let go of that. For a second, Kyle tried to act tough. He chuckled, pretending not to care, but his voice cracked slightly. What's it to you, old man? The biker didn't answer. He just stepped forward, one slow, deliberate stride. His presence alone seemed to shift the air. Kyle hesitated, then finally released Mara's shirt, taking a small step back. His smirk faded. His friends went quiet, their confidence shrinking. You boys had your fun, the biker said, his tone soft yet sharp enough to slice through the tension. Now you're gonna walk out. Calmly. But thugs don't like being told what to do, especially by men who don't flinch. Kyle spat on the floor. You think you can scare us, he snapped, though his voice trembled. That was his mistake. The younger biker behind the leader cracked his knuckles. The bald one tilted his head, smirking faintly as if he'd seen this story before. The leader's eyes never left Kyle's. No, he said, his tone calm, I don't think. I know. What happened next wasn't a brawl, it was a storm that lasted seconds. Kyle tried to shove the biker, but his arm was caught mid-motion. A twist, a step, a sound, and he was on the floor, groaning. The second man lunged, but the bald biker intercepted him, pushing him against the counter so hard the shelf rattled. The third thug froze completely, hands raised, backing away until he hit the door. The bell above it chimed as he ran. The others stumbled after him, shouting something no one bothered to hear. Then, silence. Mara stood behind the counter, her torn shirt trembling in her hands, eyes wide in disbelief. The leader looked at her gently, his tone changing completely. You okay, miss? She nodded, barely able to speak. Her voice cracked when she whispered, thank you. He just gave a small nod and said, keep your lights on a few more minutes. You're never as alone as you think. Then, without another word, the three bikers walked toward the door, their reflections flickering in the glass as they stepped into the sunlight. Mara stood still, feeling her heartbeat slow, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from relief. She looked out through the window as the motorcycles roared to life, their sound fading into the distance. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. She realized that heroes don't always wear badges or capes, sometimes, they wear leather vests and carry a quiet kind of kindness that doesn't need to be spoken. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that goodness can come from the most unexpected souls, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. And before we end, I want you to comment below, what would you have done if you were in Mara's shoes that night? Because sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is believe that kindness still walks among us, even when it comes wearing tattoos, leather, and a heart that refuses to look away when someone needs saving.